I do believe we are just going live here now. There's quite a few people with us. If you could just let us know that your audio is good, Cam, can you just give a shout out there?
Hey guys, appreciate you joining. Sometimes my mic is a little finicky, so let me know.
Okay, so if you could give us a thumbs up in the comment section that the audio is good, that would be yo, G.I. Joe, it's live. Awesome. Thank you for stating
hold on.
that.
I gotta turn my comments on. There they are.
Yep, you good?
Yep.
Okay, all good. Okay, thanks, man. All right, so my name is Adam Price. If you don't know me, which is highly likely, I work with Cam, kind of behind the scenes, and we are going to be going through his micro. This is a micro workshop for the executive desk build. Obviously, I'm not Cam. That is Cam, and he's going to be fielding your questions. This is specifically for the executive desk plans that you built. If you haven't yet done that and you just happen to be on this live with us, there's a link in the description. You go ahead and click that. You'll notice that the countdown timer is at 0 because we are now officially live for this workshop. If you have any questions at all, just put them into the comments, and if they're relevant in terms of what we're talking about, we'll slide it in. And if it's just a fantastic question, we'll make sure to make time for it. But it's awesome to have you here. And Cam, do you want to welcome your audience, and we'll get right into it?
First, thanks to Adam for emceeing this. I tend to get a little scatterbrained and start reading too many comments and start getting off topic. So Adam has been instructed to keep us focused on these desk plans. This is my wife's desk, my executive desk. I built her about 2 years ago. We're going to go through all those plans step by step. All the epoxy questions, the questions about my favorite color, Adam has been instructed to ignore. So stay focused on these desk plans, because the people that purchase that are here to kind of elaborate and learn a little bit more about how to put that desk together.
That's exactly right. And I think probably the best way to put it is from Brett, the puppeteer. That's me. But I don't have any knowledge. So it's not really the case. We are going to get right into it here. If you are here because you've purchased the plans, or if you're going to purchase the plans, this is the place to be, because we are going through this executive desk build that Cam put out. How long ago was this made? A couple years ago? A year ago?
I think about 2 years ago.
2 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, I got distracted by a question already. That's not.
I know. See, they do that to you.
I know. It's like this guy asked me, we have the same last name. Are we related? I don't know. Maybe. Anyways, so we're gonna get right into it. Dive right into it here. This is made out of a walnut slab. The desktop. You want to just talk a little bit about kind of your selection for this particular project?
Sure. So this was a single slab, and my wife specifically wanted a square edge. We both like live edge, but for this particular one, we wanted it to be a little bit more traditional. And this one was wild, figure, color, grain, everything in it was just crazy, really, really pretty. And so I had some cracks and some things that I had to fix, but it was really just a really, really pretty chunk of black walnut.
Nice, man. And where did you get it? Was it in Portland that you're able to get it?
Yeah, this was at Gobi Walnut, a shop I go to in Portland, local to here, which is pretty lucky to have a shop with this nice of wood around. It's not always this easy if you live other parts of the country or world.
Okay. And the dimensions of it, I believe 30 by 60. Is there a standardized kind of desk that you go with? That was your wife's specifications?
It's funny. I don't know how I landed on 30 by 60, but it's what I always recommend for like a good large desk. Like, it's not huge, but it's definitely a little bit bigger than your, college desk. But I get emails, almost everybody that emails me about a desk is like, I think maybe 30 by 60. And I don't know if they read that on my website somewhere or if that's the universal desk size, but it's like a perfect size as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, and that's what it ended up being. Somebody asked a question here about the sanding. We are going to get to the sanding. There's a couple things about this desk, and if we look, you can see it right in here. On the sides of it, there's some interesting cracks that came up in the desk itself, and maybe just speak into that really quickly, because at the end of this project, you'll see how it was highlighted really well with the brass resin.
Sure. So these were not, I didn't love seeing this when I cut that edge off. It wasn't something I was hoping to find. These are a type of drying defect. It's really kind of a problem with the slab, but they're not particularly uncommon. They were, like I said, just a defect from the drying process. So I did that brass resin, which I think you're going to get into in a little bit, or we're going to get into. So I ended up highlighting these with that same brass resin, and it actually ends up being a really cool feature on the outside of the table.
Cool. Yeah, and we will get into the epoxy and the resin that's being used. Somebody said if you didn't use epoxy, what's another alternative you could use for that particular aspect of this build?
I've tried a lot of things, and I've tried like those polyester resins. I've actually done, not on tables, but on like small pieces, just try. I've used automotive Bondo, and that's actually worked. I wouldn't recommend it because it's not sticky, as like an epoxy. I would think it would break away from the wood eventually. So I would recommend nothing other than epoxy. Everything else seems to not bond as well, but I have tried a number of other things.
And that's speaking from obvious experience in this regard. So there you go. That was one of the first questions.
For the very small ones, I'll use that super glue, the CA glue. Very, very small cracks, but everything else epoxy.
Okay. A part of in the video, if you haven't seen the videos, they are on his channel as well. So this is supplement to those, and he goes through it. And one of the aspects of it is the idea of passing through multiple times. Maybe for people who are just starting out into looking at building their first table or desk, maybe just speak into that, and you have your track saw lined up. But the several passes, like the benefit of that is just to cut through the wood, or do you just get a cleaner wood or cleaner cut?
It's not really a benefit. It's just a necessity. And this is the case with most saws. A lot of times they won't have the power to push all the way through in one cut, and these Festos are kind of notorious for being a little bit underpowered. So what would be the best way to do this, whether you have a circular saw, a DeWalt type of circular saw, or a fancy one like this, make several shallow passes with your guide. And then if you want a really clean edge, because when you do 3 or 4 or 5 passes, sometimes it's not a perfect edge, you can move your guide over just like a 1/16 of an inch and then cut one full depth pass, and that'll give you a really, really clean edge.
Okay, awesome. This particular build does have this cool kind of design. You talk about it down the road here with the 45 on the 45, and then this, if you have the plans, this is a 22.5 degree, I believe, chamfer that you put on the side of it.
Yep.
What inspired that design behind it? Because if we go back to the picture, you'll notice that we will get into the finishing and the sanding. There's some questions coming in here. But this aspect right here, this 22.5 degree, maybe just highlight the setup for this. And did you see this before? Or I guess that's kind of a 2-part question, but.
Sure. Well, I'm certainly not the first person to put a bevel or a chamfer on the side of a table. It's not uncommon at all. A lot of people, I do think it sets the tables apart just a little bit from a square edge. And that's probably why I started doing it. And the reason I don't do it with a router bit, the reason I'm not doing it here, is most router bits are pretty small. And so you can't get that full depth bevel or chamfer on the side. So I think it just looks clean. It looks a little bit, a little fancier. And then
it looks great.
The corner cut was like you said, it was a 45, not a 22.5.
Yeah, the corner was, I think, 45 over
Yep.
right at the end there. And you just have the overhang set up on your track saw. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that was something I actually want to try another table with no chamfer and only the 45s on the corners, because I saw a picture frame once when I like this, and it was just a really cool, unique look. And I'd like to try that on maybe a really thick slab. I think it'd look kind of cool to have that 45 nipped off.
Awesome. So we have somebody's firing in a question here about saw blade deflection. Have you ever experienced saw blade deflection with your track saw?
Not particularly, no. I think sometimes I'll get like a kickback when I try to go too deep. That's why he mentioned I make those multiple passes. If I try to go too deep, especially with walnut likes to pinch on the blades. It's got this internal stress, and it is a real pain. And so I've got that track saw stuck in these slabs before, and you have to sit there and wrench it out and hopefully not bend your blade. But as far as the blade running straight, it's usually pretty good.
Awesome. Next up, we get into the actual cleaning of the. So we're gonna kind of do this in two parts. We're gonna go over the desktop and then the legs is the second part of this, which is potentially a bit more technical in terms of the build, but the prep for the side of it. Now, these are some of the cleaning tools that you used, and I know that when you do get into cleaning it out, what's your process for, like, what do you take away? What do you leave? And obviously if it's, if there's some kind of issue where it needs to get pulled out, or how do you kind of go against, okay, this looks like it could get pulled out, but I could leave it in. What does that process look like?
If it's not wood, if it's not part of the tree itself, like that anything bark or dirt or grime, if I can get it out, I'll get it out. At some point you have to accept, if it's down 3 inches and it's a millimeter wide, you can't get it out. There's no physical way to do it, so it's going to stay there. So you do have to kind of accept certain things are going to be stuck in there. But I do spend a lot of time because I'm really, really worried about that bond lasting forever. And theoretically it will if it's perfectly clean. So I do spend a lot of time making sure everything's really, really clean.
So in this build, not to put you too much on the spot, but how much time would you allocate, just to give people an idea, if they're to go out and snag, a slab of walnut like this? How much time would you anticipate somebody who purchased the plans and build this project to invest into the cleaning of it out?
This wasn't an epoxy table, which I'm sure a lot of people have questions about epoxy tables, which this is not a epoxy table. This particular one isn't an epoxy table build. So those ones I generally have a little bit or a lot more time, I would say. This was a pretty clean slab. There was just a handful of cracks. So I probably had 1.5 to 2 hours into cleaning this one, whereas a really bad epoxy table I might have 6 hours into.
Right. And then is there another wood besides walnut that would work really well for a project like this?
Oh yeah, I think any hardwood, and that doesn't mean you couldn't use a softwood, but so many, like if white oak would be great, and ash, and whatever you got. If it's a hardwood, there's a Janka rating, which I know you don't know what that is, Adam, but some of the people out there, yeah. So Janka is how hardwood is, and it's just a number scale, and walnut, depending on the walnut, is around 1,000, I believe, and soft maple is around like 800 or 900, and Doug fir 2x4 stuff is around 400.
Okay.
So anything above that 800 or so, you can Google, whatever fir. If you have a beech slab, if you have a poplar slab, you can Google it. And I'd say anything above 800, 900 Janka is a good place to be.
Okay. Some people are in the comments here saying sycamore.
Sycamore is good.
Pecan. And
pecan is awesome. That was my favorite cutting board I ever built, was out of pecan, and it's super dense. It's really hard. I think it's like 1,1800 on the Janka scale, which is much harder than walnut.
Okay. This is not my relative, but it is Noah Price. And he's got a question for you. If you don't take the knots or take out the knots or the bark, what would happen on a build like this?
It'll probably fall out eventually, which it depends on the part of it. If it falls off on the corner, you're not really out anything. If you're holding two slabs together, then it's a problem.
Yeah. We are going to get into that right now in terms of starting to get into the resin with it. For this particular build, you used brass resin. And I think, if I remember correctly, like I said, if you haven't watched the videos, you can go check them out. They're absolutely fantastic. But you did about 100 kind of tests beforehand to get to this.
I might have exaggerated that number, but it was probably 25.
Okay, still a lot. And what does that testing look like in terms of getting the right resin and getting the right look that you're going for?
So the problem why I had to keep doing so many of these, and I'll kind of fill people in before I get into it. What this was I found real brass powder. You can buy it on Amazon or other places. It's for cold casting. What they do is they mix it with a resin and they pour it in these molds, and they make fake looking bronze molds. So you don't have to actually cast a statue in bronze. You can cast it in this epoxy metal mix, and it looks just like real bronze. So I was like, let's put it in a table. And the problem that I found when I used a faster curing epoxy is the bubbles in it would leave little pits, little gaps in that epoxy. And it just didn't look right. It didn't look good. So what I ended up doing was using the slow, like the deep pour epoxy. And you have to do it upside down because that metal sinks instantly. Like it's not like with powdered pigments, like a normal epoxy table, the metal sinks. So what you have to do is mix about 50-50 metal to epoxy or even more, pour it in there. And then I flip the table upside down. So all that metal settled on the tape that I'd taped over it. And then I could kind of sand and machine it down.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, what was it? Was it a two-day cure on this one? It was quite lengthy, wasn't it?
Probably several days, because that stuff doesn't cure for 3 days, and it was a pretty small amount, so maybe even like a week.
And then from here, some people are asking about the sanding side of it, so we're gonna jump into that. This isn't, as your audience is well aware, you are known for your epoxy tables. If you are interested in that, there is a link in the description that goes, we're not going to go into depth with epoxy. That's what that particular course is for. So if Cam has inspired you on that journey, like many of the comments here, which are great, you can go ahead and check that out. That's in the description somewhere down below there. But we're going to continue on with this particular build and get into the sanding side of it. And so in terms of this, I think it was you went away or something like that. I can't exactly remember. But after it's cured, is it just you go in there with a belt sander and just kind of hit it?
So the reason this looks like such a mess is because I mixed up that brass resin, poured it down the cracks, and then I put tape over it, flipped it upside down. And so what happened is it did fill the cracks, but then it started to kind of bowl out of that tape. It started to push its way out. And so I had a mound. I mean, it was a very shallow crest of brass epoxy. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want that, it wasn't the intended plan. So I had to use the belt sander to really shave off a, 1/8 of an inch of that brass resin before I got just to the crack portion.
Somebody is asking into that when you, I believed it. We'll go with this one here. Sorry. The sealing, was it Tyvek tape that you used?
That was Tyvek tape. I haven't found a perfect tape for this. I've tried a lot of them. Lately, I've been using the Gorilla tape for epoxy a little bit more. I don't know that it's the perfect one or not, but if anybody out there has found the perfect epoxy tape, let me know, because the Tyvek is just okay. The Tuck tape is the same. Gorilla tape is just okay.
And so it's kind of like out of necessity. If you have one, put in the comments there as well. It'd be awesome for other people who are watching. And this is where the cracks on the side, probably not as accessible if you're doing a table, but with the size of the desk, maybe just speak into this process here is this, because at the end you'll see like this really made it pop.
This was the same process, and I had to do each corner or each edge for that same several day cure process, which was a real pain because I'd pour it, tape it, flip that side down, and at least wait for it to set up in 2 days, and then I could probably pour the other ones while those are curing. They're still set up, they just need a couple more days to cure. Pour the other side, flip it. So it was pretty time consuming now that I'm remembering this.
Somebody mentioned aluminum tape. That works great. Have you ever tried aluminum tape?
I own some, but I've never tried it with epoxy. The real duct tape. I'll try that.
There you go. Thanks for that, Doug. If you do have a question, go ahead and throw it into the comments, and if it's contextually relevant, we'll throw it on the screen here. Somebody asked this. Doug, by the way. Yeah, it's somebody asked this. Could you use paint as epoxy dye, or do you have to use a dye that's meant for epoxy?
I don't know for sure because I haven't tried paint, but I think it doesn't have to be meant for epoxy specifically. The dye I normally use is it's a woodworking dye. It's an alcohol-based dye. Works really well. It's called TransTint, if anybody's wondering. And they didn't invent that for epoxy. It's invented to dye wood. But I I wouldn't use paint, I guess would be the quick answer to that.
These specifically on the side, these little small cracks with the powder, and I believe it was CA glue that you used in
Yep.
coordination with that.
Yep.
Maybe just speak into that process a little bit, if you.
So this was a little different process for these, and I was actually glad I learned about this. This was something that apparently wood turners have been doing for years. What I did is I actually took that powder, the brass powder, and I think someone mentioned it earlier. I'm glad that they pointed out. I keep saying brass. I bought bronze powder that ended up looking more like brass. I can't explain it, but that I do recommend making samples before you put it on your table, because mine ended up a little bit different than I was expecting. Anyway, this brass or bronze powder, I ended up brushing it right into those tiny little cracks, and I used the super thin, the very thin CA glue, the thin woodworking super glue, and I just let it soak down into those little bits, and it actually looked just as good as any of the other brass resin that I did.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, it took quite a few passes. I believe you said the cure time with this, though, is like pretty cool. Like you only have a few seconds to work with it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point for bringing that up. It's seconds, which is nice because you're not waiting a week like the other cracks.
Totally.
So you put a little bit in, put this CA glue, and it might dip below the surface, and you could brush a little more powder in, touch it up again, and yeah, I could do this whole section in 10 minutes instead of a week.
Somebody's asked this clear CA glue for that. Was that what you used? The clear CA glue?
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah. The thin. So they make thin, medium, and thick, and you really need to use the thin for that.
Okay. This side, and this is where you wanted to really bring out that metallic kind of sheen on the project, and so maybe the sanding to really do that. Are you able to just kind of give us some insight into how you brought out that metallic look in this start of the finishing process?
So here I'm just using the rasp because it was a good flat surface. If I used my sander, it would probably try to round over because I had that epoxy kind of lumped up just like it was on top. So, a block sander would probably be maybe even better than the rasp. I was just kind of throwing tools at it till I found something that worked. But it was a little tricky because you'd sand it if you really need to kind of go with the grain, and that would leave those almost machined lines in the resin, which depending on the finish you use, they get a little bit muted after you apply the finish. But yeah, you'll see it sands just like real brass. It's pretty cool to look and have a crack filled. Every little part of the crack is filled, and it looks like machined brass in it.
Somebody's coming in with this question here. The idea of like how much, so with how big of a crack can you fill with a CA glue as opposed to actually just kind of more doing like a deep pour aspect to it?
I would say 1/8 of an inch if you want a number.
Okay, and I know you talked about how like using the paintbrush and just kind of poking it down in there and then going over with the CA glue was beneficial. If you haven't yet, like I keep mentioning, go ahead and watch those videos. They're absolutely fantastic in terms of getting you through this build. If you are thinking about adding the components to it, I know that I used a jig for this in terms of getting it exactly where you want it. I can only imagine when the effort and energy that you've put into a project like this, and then you have to cut through the top of it. Is that like a gut check time for you, or like it's like this is why I use a jig specifically? Maybe just speak into that a little bit.
I don't get super nervous anymore cutting into these pieces, and I probably used to. Well, I'm sure I used to more. It's the old cliche of the making sure you got your measurements right, and I probably spent a little bit more time making sure everything's lined up. One thing I know we're all here to learn how to do it ourselves. There's so many CNC shops out there for so affordable. You could probably, if you were too nervous to tackle this yourself, you could probably call around and find someone to do this for like $150, which, again, I'm here to show you how I did it myself, but CNC is pretty affordable these days. And these were pretty critical. I do want to mention, if people are doing this, that when you place it, something I almost didn't think about is the legs that I know we're going to get into in a little bit. They sit in from the ends. So I had to make sure that these outlets didn't overlap the legs at all. So
Right.
make sure you have plenty of space, because I wanted them as far out as I could, but not so they interfered with the legs. So that's something that would be easy to forget if you're not thinking about it.
Yeah, somebody has a question about that. We will get into the book matched legs, and how Cam brought that to this project, which is pretty cool design. You mentioned something in the video, and I'm just curious your thoughts on it in terms of the machining the line. So I'll show you a quick image here. That kind of you said you machine the lines to make it more look to make it look more like metal. What exactly was that process for you in machining the lines?
So I do want to give kind of the disclaimer is once I use the Rubio, or we'll go over the finish too. I initially used Osmo, I ended up refinishing it with Rubio. Those finishes, despite the fact that they're kind of a wipe on, wipe off, they still do fill in some. So they did fill in some of those machine lines, and it didn't look quite as cool as it did right there in that particular aspect of the video. So if you're doing this and you're wondering how come mine doesn't look like that, the finish is good because it fills in things, that protects things, prevents us from stains. That said, you do lose a little bit of that. But what I was doing is I was going back with the grain on I think like 320 grit, and was just putting some light sanding on that metal portion to get those machine lines in there.
And the finish you used initially was Osmo, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
3054. And then did you switch it up, or did you keep it with that?
So this is I'm glad you're going into this, which is I guess why people are doing this workshop, because I did this finish. I'd done tests with this finish before. I've done other pieces with it, and we'd had it, we'd cured for several weeks, went through all the steps, and we were just had these horrible marks all over it. And I'm like, what did my wife do to this? She's, so hard on things. I can't believe she did this. So I refinished it with the same Osmo, and I told her, like, gave her a lecture, like, hey, we got to take care of this. Only clean it with a damp rag. Long story short, she wasn't doing anything wrong, and just like water on a rag was destroying this finish, which is unacceptable. People should be able to wipe this down.
Yeah.
So this was a learning experience. I ended up refinishing the top with Rubio, which is what I've done for a couple of years now. I'm not sponsored by Rubio at all. I've tried to be. They don't want to talk to me. I'm promoting them for free, but it's a good finish. It's a really, really good finish. My personal dining table is finished with it. That table is refinished with it. I refinished my coffee table with it. And it looks just like Osmo, but actually protects.
Cool. Well, there you go. Maybe they're watching, man. Maybe this is the time. Hey,
why would they sponsor me? I keep telling people to use it for free. I do have a video in my library on how to finish a table with the Rubio process if you guys want to know.
The next question we got coming in is, if you don't have a this buffer white floor pad they use, what are the alternatives that you could recommend to anybody who's watching that doesn't have that particular tool to use?
That's a great question. With the Osmo process, you kind of needed the buffer, which is a bummer. It's an expensive buffer, but the Rubio, I do think it's always better if you can buff it in. I think a little friction always helps these waxy finishes, so it's better. But if you don't, I've used just a Bondo trowel, those little flexible, or a credit card. I've used credit card. I've used that a lot of times, and you can just trowel it on, and just something, a rag. I mean, anything with the Rubio to wipe it into all the corners. I like these white pads. If you can find them at Home Depot in the rental section by their floor buffers, you can buy the big ones and cut them up, and just use them like a little sponge and kind of scrub them in. But yeah, you don't need much to apply the Rubio.
Nice. Somebody does say this though, it's worth it for a good finish, to have a tool like that. Obviously, I know you use this tool regularly.
If you're going to build one table, you don't need this buffer. It's figure something else out. But if you're going to do, if you want to maybe look into selling these things, if you're going to do more than one, or more than 5, now is maybe when you want to start thinking about using a buffer. Also, I've used my orbital sander. You just cut a little piece of that white pad.
Oh, okay.
And just use an orbital sander to buff it in, and it's not quite as powerful, but it still works.
And do you get the same? I mean, this is the preeminent finish that you're going to be using with this particular buffer. With the orbital sander, do you get the same results?
Again, I think chemically there's something to that, like friction of the heavy 12-pound buffer that's actually like really, really working it in. So I would suspect it's a little better protection wise, but as far as looks, and again, this is just hyperbole. Or I don't know if that's the right word. What's the word I'm looking for here? Speculation.
Sure.
Conjecture, is that a word?
Conjecture, yeah, that is a word. I've heard it before.
Okay,
Yeah.
This might be conjecture, depending on if that's a word or not. But I suspect it's a better quality finish with the buffer, but I don't think it's necessary. If that answers.
And then, just is there a set RPM that you use your buffer at?
So this one is only one speed and it's low. So if you have an automotive buffer, don't turn it up to 4,000 and like wail on it. You want a good low speed.
Which would be this. Just use it on your car. If you need to justify it, hey, you can go get an automotive buffer, but you got to adjust accordingly. So that's basically, we're going to jump into the table legs, or the desk legs, sorry, here. Just before we do that, if you could, how has it held up? Is there anything? How has the project held up over the time that it's been in use?
Sure. I mentioned my wife doesn't baby things. She's not an animal, but they're meant to be used. The brass resin, I wasn't sure. I was a little nervous, and I always like to try things on my own house, my own projects before I send them out into the real world. And the brass is like perfect. It looks just like, the day I refinished it, I should say. The brass has held up. The light that I got, this gear is from a company, Juniper Design. The light did go out and they replaced it at no charge. I sent it back.
Great.
And they warrantied it. All the switches, everything, works great. And still using it. It's upstairs. She, got her through a lot of COVID.
Hey, awesome. A lot of people are just, as they're coming on, just thanking you for the inspiration.
By the way, I see the comments. I'm just not allowed to address it myself.
You're not allowed. No, we're trying to keep you on track.
I do appreciate it, guys. It's awesome you guys are showing up and hanging out and talking project.
And so we're going to jump into the table leg side of it. So that's basically the desk legs. We have the desktop is finished. And again, there's a full video on that, and we're going to jump over to the leg side of it, which is the book matched kind of design that you came up with. Did you see that somewhere and thought, I'm going to do that, or you do happen to remember where actually you first engaged those design cues with it?
So I'm a strict believer that there are no more original ideas. Everything's been thought of. That said, I hadn't seen legs done like this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I was inspired somewhere else. I'm sure someone else has done the same style. So when you send me a popular woodworking article from 1965, yes, okay. Like, I'm sure it's been done first. But no, I just like the book match. I like mirror image. I like the symmetry of it. And I thought it'd be cool to try to incorporate it into a table base.
The first side of this, the first stage was, I think you just used stock 2x4s to kind of map it out. To make sure that you had enough wood, I believe.
It was really checking the angles and checking the design. I wish I was good at SketchUp or Fusion 360, like I bet a lot of the viewers are good at that. I can't do things and I can't render things, so I have to actually physically make them first to do that, which I got to learn how to render, because it'd be a lot easier building this out of 2x6s first.
And then just the practical side of it. The idea of like when you're building this and you're thinking about the practical side of it, when you're putting it together, is it metal or is it wood in terms of like the load bearing aspect of it? Is that a big part of your thought process?
No, I think any table legs is going to hold so much more weight than you could ever put on it. I did an epoxy strength test video where we wanted to see how much weight it takes to break that river bond, because people would say, oh, this table will break if you set something on it or somebody jumps on it or whatever. And for that, I built 2x4 legs, and they were pretty stout, but they were still made out of 2x4s. And people kept saying that the legs were going to break first because I only built them out of 2x4s. And in the end, we dropped a 900-pound pointed oak log that we sharpened with the chainsaw through this table from a forklift 20 feet in the air, and the legs actually stayed in the same place. Like the table broke like right through it, but the legs were still standing.
So it's gonna be able to take it the weight for sure, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you're using maybe tiny, half-inch turned poplar legs, okay, maybe those will break, but they're going to hold way more weight than you need.
Just another question from the audience: do you prefer wooden legs versus metal alternatives? As you kind of even like not even just for this desk build, but even in general, what do you prefer to work with?
Oh, I love customers that order metal legs because they're super easy. It's hard to try to talk them out of metal legs, because this desk, I had twice as much time into the legs as I did the top. So when a customer says, "Hey, I want black metal legs because I saw it in another video," I say, "Awesome," because I can't charge 3 times as much just for some wood legs, generally.
Yeah.
That said, honestly, I probably like the look of the wood legs. I'm a woodworker, we like wood stuff. But my personal dining table, we did a hybrid one. It's a kind of wish I had a picture handy. Cool metal base, but it has a big wood stretcher down the middle, so it's walnut and steel. So I like it all.
Okay, let's get into the book matched concept here. And so you talked in the video about resawing it for the book match, and then we'll get into how you kind of had to create the depth of it by adding walnut to it. So maybe just speak about that and like the grain and like to get that mirror image that you were actually going for.
Sure. Do you have any images handy of the
I do. Yeah.
finished base?
Sure. Let me just quickly pull one up. I will have to. There we go.
So when I was shopping, perfect right there. When I was shopping for the wood, I didn't want to just go buy the prettiest individual piece of wood. I liked those vertical lines, those linear lines. And so I went and I found some pieces that had that, because I thought those would give the symmetry that I was looking for, instead of just trying to find some, quote, gaudy piece of wood. Right. I liked those lines. And so that was just a preference, no reason other than I thought it was the look I was going for. And so that was how I chose the wood. Sorry, what was the question about how I went through the process?
Yeah, so just like now it's actually getting, if you look at the bottom, like getting them to actually mirror themselves. And so I can
sure. And so I kind of laid everything out, those sample pieces. I traced them onto, so I would know I had enough wood to go around for each piece.
I have an image there. I believe that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah, so there's the book match. That's 2 separate legs, how they're going to kind of mirror each other. So I cut each piece in half. Now you have the book match, and now I would have to glue that to another piece that's about 3/4 of an inch thick to give that depth, because I was only starting out with an 1.5 inch piece. Cut it in half, you have 3/4, and now I want it to be a little thicker, so I glued it to another piece. Which all this took so much time, and you have to weigh whether it's worth it for your particular project or not. And for me, it was, although I don't think I've ever had anybody notice that my table legs are book matched. So it might be a little realization that I'm having right now, actually.
So you bulked it up with this additional walnut that you had, right? From the in the inside of it, right?
Yeah, and I did want to use walnut from the same batch, like the same, right. When I got my boards, you don't want to just mix and match, because it'll be pretty different colors. That'll be kind of jarring. So yeah, I used the however many boards I bought from the same tree. I made sure to use all that for the same one. Marked everything pretty carefully, so I knew this goes with this piece, and it's gonna be long enough for this, and making sure to build everything oversized enough to cut down to my final size with the template.
Now, there was some blowout that you experienced on one little corner of it, and I'm not going to go into detail around that.
I know, you got to point that out.
No, well, it has to do with this question here, which I think is a great question. Is walnut is such a varied wood when it comes to color. Do you have any tips for finding complementary pieces that come from different trees?
I have gone, I've taken a piece and gone into my wood supplier and started laying wood down on the floor next to it to try to find. I need one piece. I bought my father-in-law's desk. We were building him one for his birthday a couple years ago, and we decided he wanted we'd add a complimentary piece. So I bought this one really beautiful slab that was $220, and I ended up and I needed a sliver that was about this long by 4 feet or so, 5 feet. And I ended up spending like $370 on this big chunk of wood to cut one sliver off of to fit with this one, because that was the only one that the color matched on. So it can be a real challenge, but you can do it if you are patient.
Putting in the time. That's a great question, by the way, because I'm sure people find themselves in that situation on the regular. When you have a piece of wood that you've invested in, you've went out and got, and you really want to highlight it. I know you go into in depth to some extent about the idea of a template, and so maybe just speak to the importance of that in your own workshop and how you utilized the template. And we're not going to worry about the hole in the middle, because if you watch the video, you'll know it's there. It has nothing to do with this project, but the idea that you using a template and your woodworking techniques.
Yeah, template woodworking is something I want to do more of. I don't feel like I do enough of it, but it's pretty cool, because if you like this, I wanted 4 legs. I wanted them all to be, or I needed them all to be exactly the same. And so the easiest thing to do is you make this template, and the template doesn't have to be perfect. I think it goes from 2 7/8 to 4 inches. But since you're using this on a jig, it wouldn't matter if it went from 2.5 to 4 inches or 2 3/30 seconds. It doesn't, what you're going to be doing is building everything to fit these legs. So using a template, everything will be absolutely identical. And that's a really great way to get these repeatable shapes. Because if you try to use a taper jig or something on your bandsaw or your table saw, it'll always be off just a little bit. And it's really, really frustrating.
I can imagine. And so, like if you do watch the video, he does go into just that concept as well, just to kind of have it dialed in. An expensive, I believe this is a vacuum Festool joiner, and use dominoes in this to get the 5 degrees.
You're embarrassing yourself with your verbiage, but yeah.
Am I? Okay. Well, that's not surprising. I'm not really a woodworker. I'm here to help facilitate the process. Do tell. What do we have here? And the question is, what is the alternative to a $1,500 piece of machinery that is more valuable in your shop?
And they discontinued this tool too. So if you are thinking about one, try to buy it now, because there's still a few kicking around the country, but they've stopped making this tool, and it's awesome. Anyway, it's a vacuum suction cup that like holds your pieces for you. It's super frivolous, but it's really convenient to work with. The alternative to this would be clamping it down, which most people have a clamp. So you don't need something like this. The domino is something like the buffer, but probably more important. If you want to do any type of joinery, eventually you're going to want a domino. And that's just kind of, it sucks. It's an expensive tool, but it's a really, really useful tool. You could use dowels and pins and line things up, and you get it done. They've built furniture before without dominoes before, but it's a really nice tool. And I've never heard anybody that owns one that's like, not worth it.
It is in your opinion.
Yeah.
Not my opinion. Don't take my opinion for it. The idea of this, you mentioned clamps briefly, and purchasing clamps, wood clamps. I think you use pole clamps. And somebody who's starting out into woodworking or looking at building this project specifically, what do you recommend to be the most cost effective in terms of, if you're building this project, in terms of the clamps you are going to need?
I think the word you're trying to say there was pipe clamps, because if you
look
on the right side of that image is a pipe clamp, and I did a lot with pipe clamps for a long time.
Those are them there, correct?
Yep, and those are nice because you can, if you go buy a 10-foot section of pipe, you can clamp 10 feet. They're not quite, they'll bow a little bit more than parallel clamps, so you want to make sure, if you're doing like a tabletop, to have them on top and on bottom to kind of equalize that. But pipe clamps are really, really useful tool, and they're pretty inexpensive. So when you need to start buying, a dozen clamps, start with buying a dozen pipe clamps and then work up to the other ones.
And somebody just, is asking, what are your favorite types to work with generally?
I have a pretty good amount of those parallel clamps now. I haven't tried a lot of different brands. I have Bessey, and I don't know that I've worked with non-Bessey parallel clamps, if I'm being honest. So I can speak to the other ones. parallel clamps are nice. You need a bunch of different styles. You need F clamps. If you guys want a hot tip, the Shop Fox Deep Throat F clamps, they're on Amazon. They're really pretty inexpensive. They're like $15. Really, really nice clamp for the money. So highly recommend those.
Awesome. Okay, here's where we are in the build right now. We've kind of put it together. We're going to jump over into the idea of oversizing the holes for the wood movement. Maybe just speak to somebody who hasn't built a desk before or a table in terms of like the wood movement and your preparation for that.
Sure. So the tabletop, the wood is going to primarily move across the grain. So if you have a 30 by 60 desk, it's going to move across that 30. So it might go from 30 inches to 30 and an eighth inches over the course of summer to winter. And that's a little bit of an exaggeration. There's lots of tables you can look up online. I think Katz Moses actually has a calculator where he'll calculate the wood movement by species. All you need to know is going to move some. And so making those holes racetrack shaped, little ovals, and not torquing them down, just kind of get them nice and snug, will allow for it just to creep out. That's a little bit each year, and it's not a lot, but you do need to allow for some of it.
And then you spoke about when you put your brad point bit just for center alignment in there, and then you kind of pre-drilled for it. When you're going into the desk itself, what is your concern around when you're fastening it to it? Like of actually, what's the best preparation that somebody can do in order to mitigate any kind of damage that you would create when you are fastening the legs to the desk itself?
I'm not sure what you mean. Can you rephrase
Sure.
that?
So like when you're putting in like the threads on the side of it, like in terms of making sure there's no blowout around it or any like cracks. Sure. Like I'm assuming like in this process.
So you need to make sure you're using the right size bit per the fastener, and that was something I used to kind of eyeball, but I've learned you want to actually read the manufacturer's instructions. And something I do now, I didn't do on this desk, is there's a countersink bit now, and it adds a little bevel around the top, and that really helps prevent the kind of little wood chips that might come up when you're putting these threaded inserts in. So adding a little countersink rim to that.
Okay. So if you have a question about the finishing, we're going to jump into that right now in terms of the desk legs. And so when you use the Osmo, I believe it was the 3054. Did this one stay the same throughout?
This one didn't get wiped down. So this one I did not refinish. I believe this is still the Osmo there. And I actually just did a piece. I'm not like hating on Osmo. I don't wish them any personal ill will. It just doesn't protect very well. I just did a big wall piece for my in my shop, and Osmo, you can get a little higher gloss than the Rubio, and I did the wall piece with Osmo. So Osmo looks pretty. It just doesn't protect super well.
And I've heard you mention this a couple of times in terms of like a dust-free environment in the finishing. Now, I know you mentioned that this the dust that accumulates through when you're in the finishing process. Is there a way that you specifically mitigate that? I know that you use a lot of to protect your product. You do use a lot of covers and plastic covers throughout the finishing process. But
so I don't really actually. This type of finish is not like the old polyurethane that we, the can of Minwax we got from Home Depot, or at least that I got, when I was growing up trying to finish something. That it needs to be in a Intel microchip clean room, and if one stray, bit of dust falls on it, you have a dimple and it looks horrible. This stuff, you just wipe it on, wipe it off, and honestly, I could hit a leaf blower with my shop, and it's not going to affect this finish. It's just this type of, it's called a hard wax oil, and it's not affected by dust. It's just, you wipe everything off so there's nothing for it to settle in.
Nice. We have one question here that is coming in. If you want to refresh a piece that has ceramic coat, do you need to sand all the way back down to the wood and start over, or can you apply maintenance oil over everything?
That's a excellent question, because I'm pretty new to the ceramic coat. I've only been using it for, I don't know, several months now, but not a long time. And not many people are putting ceramic coat on wood. The Black Forest guys, I think, are the first ones I know that are manufacturing a ceramic coat for wood finishes. And I've had that same question, and I even asked them about it, and I think I got kind of a cryptic answer, meaning that I don't think they knew because they haven't, done it. That said, I just did this. So I went ahead and just tried adding the maintenance oil over. It'd been several months, and I applied it. I didn't notice a huge difference, and then I applied the ceramic coat again, and I didn't notice a huge difference. It didn't have anything dramatic. It didn't beat up. It didn't have a chemical reaction. That said, I don't know if it did. I don't know how much of that ceramic coat was preventing it from bonding or not. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I applied the maintenance oil, wiped it on, wiped it off like I normally do, and everything went okay. It was hard to tell whether it really refreshed it or not.
Okay. This is from Eric. How long is the finish good for when using Rubio? If you sell a table, do you have to recommend any type of maintenance or upkeep for it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm really particular with them about the cleaning, which is just wipe it with a dry microfiber and then a damp microfiber. And so oddly enough, the Osmo liquid wax cleaner is the only cleaner I use. I don't like the Rubio soap. I just feel like it kind of, I don't know. I think it affects the finish. The Osmo liquid wax cleaner is a really nice cleaner that will help take these stains out. And then what I'll tell them is if I'll walk them through the steps to do the maintenance oil that I say, maybe once every 1 to 2 years. If they want to wipe it on, wipe it off, I'll kind of walk them through the steps on how to do that. And, so far everybody's having a lot of luck, a lot of success with it.
We are going to start to wrap it up here. I have a couple questions, to kind of wrap it all up in terms of, somebody who might be on the fence about building a project like this. What would you, recommend in terms of skill level before, kind of taking this?
Sure. I do want to think if anybody has bought the plans or is thinking about buying the plans, it's a pretty advanced project. So I think that I want to be upfront about that. I don't want you to think, I don't want to tell people, grab dad's hammer and his hacksaw and you can have this desk too. So you need some tools, you need some skill. And Adam actually had the idea of packaging these plans with some more beginner plans. Cause he's like, look, a lot of people that buy these plans might not be ready to dive into this. So I do appreciate you suggesting getting a little bit more basic plans, because this one, it's a challenge, and I want people to be prepared to struggle with it.
And if you do jump in there, there are, I think, 26 other plans that are kind of designed more for the person who's just coming in for it, and they're kind of building a weekend projects, not like this executive desk build here. Cam, anything else you want to kind of just add to your audience as we're kind of wrapping up here? We're going to finish it up in the next minute or so. But anything you want to say for this overall project in terms of, how it went for you and, just some encouragement out to those who are jumping into it right now?
I'm always loving I want to hear from them, like, feedback. Do you want more projects like that? Do you want, more basic stuff? So I love feedback, and that can be right here in the comments. It can be in a YouTube comment or wherever, Instagram. I just love to hear from you guys about if you're like, it's too complicated. I'd rather you just pour epoxy on something and slap some steel legs on it. Or if you wanted this type of stuff.
Somebody did mention stone. Have you ever thought about working with stone and incorporating stone?
I think about working with everything. I think there's so much cool stuff out there that, soapstone. I love the look of soapstone. I think, and you can actually use woodworking tools with soapstone. I've never worked with it, but it's a really cool, dense, like black, veiny wood that you can use woodworking tools on. So I was going to do an outdoor barbecue, but my wife got bigger plans for that. So that was something I was going to do with stone.
So if you do have anything that you'd like to see Cam kind of work with, go ahead and put in the comments below. But man, I just want to thank you I know you're super keen to pass along what you've learned over the years you've been woodworking, and I know it's a passion of yours to equip your audience with the skill set and, you know, kind of avoid the mistakes that are naturally going to happen, but a part of the process. And, you know, as watching your content, watching your channel, it's utterly engaging, you know, start to finish. And I know that that sentiment is carried throughout your audience. So I just want to personally thank you for all the comments that didn't get pushed onto the screen that kind of shared that that the inspiration that you've brought into the lives of your audience, man. That's fantastic. For those of you who are watching the live, we're going to wrap it up now. We just want to thank you for joining us. And, you know, we're going to end it shortly here. And if you are thinking about jumping on and snagging those plans, there's a link somewhere in the description. You can snag those. And thanks, Cam. Thanks, guys, for watching. And we'll check you out next time on the next live.
Yeah, thanks for emceeing this, Adam.
Yeah, no problem, man. Okay, take care. Bye.